And good morning. Welcome to the adult Bible class. We're going to get started here. If you'd be opening your Bibles and be ready for us. We are reading through the Bible. Don't trust that. So I would let you know that new reading schedules for the month of April are out in the foyer. On the table between the two nursery doors, says on your right as you go out these main doors, it's yellow for the month of April. So take a look at that. And we are also encouraging you to journal as you read, to write, do some writing. So there are extra journals up here that are available if you are ready to do that. But as you read through and as you write and question and ask questions, we're asking you to think about this question as you're reading. What is important to God? What is going on here that's important to Him? So thanks to John for filling in last week. Angie had come down and tested positive for COVID, so I didn't want to share any of that with you, so I stayed home too. And so not this last week, week before last then, we were reading through 1st and 2nd Kings and 2nd Chronicles. But then this last week, we were also continuing that journey, but also picked up some prophets. Book of Jonah, Book of Amos, introduced to Micah, Isaiah was introduced. Of course, we're reading through all of that about the different kings. How do you guys do with that? Jumping back and forth between Israel and Judah and who's reigning here and what's happening, and you like
Because it all kind of different authors, but it all happened around the same time. So it's
Mm-hmm.
a different perspective.
Same
thing.
Yeah, so we've got Jonah introduced in the Chronicles, in the Kings and Chronicles. It says, oh yeah, there's this prophet named Jonah. All I ever knew about him was he went to Nineveh. Oh, wait a minute, he was doing all that over here? We don't know anything about what he did there, do we? But just that story about Nineveh, I thought that was the whole thing. Don't know what else there was. That's the only thing we have left. So what else? Anybody else need a program when you read through this? No. I did some looking, and that's about the size I thought it would look like. Bring out your telescope so that you can read what's there. I did enlarge it. Let's see how that looks. A little bit better. Of that central area there, the purple on the left, it's still on your left. Purple on the left is the kingdom of Judah, the southern kingdom. The light blue on the right is the northern kingdom. What do you notice about it? What have you noticed as you read through this section? Mm-hmm. Considerably more turnover. Yes. A lot of us have. Each one of those vertical columns is a different dynasty, if you will, lineage. I hesitate to use the word dynasty because Zimri up there in the middle lasted a whole week. I can't really call a week of ruling a dynasty, but anyway. So yeah, what else? Or what else do you want to talk about as we look at the king portion of this?
Sometimes the son it's all jumbled. It's not that lineage that is in Judah.
Right. Yeah. All of Judah they are all descendants of David, as was promised. Why was it promised? It is Christ's lineage. But do you remember reading the phrase, because God had promised it to David, because they walked, it was a promise to David. David sought the Lord with all his heart, and because of his life and what was passed on, it's your son will be on the throne. Yeah. Yes.
When you establish something, you establish I'll call it the rules of engagement of how you proceed forward. And during David's lifetime, his son tried to take, tried to take the kingdom from him, but he didn't fight him directly. I mean, his son was unsuccessful in getting rid of David, and that establishes that lineage continually from that point forward, that the son would inherit a son, not all sons, but a son. And so you get that continuous lineage. Whereas you contrast it to the other type of kingdom, you have an order of who becomes the next king is just who kills first. The person who kills somebody else takes over. And so that's why you have such a discontinuous line on the other side. It's like everybody knows the rules to engage in the king. You have to get rid of the prior king. It doesn't matter if you're not the son of the king. But once that established here, it continued on.
Yeah. There is the different way the power was transferred. And do you remember what God promised Jeroboam the first when he gave him the 10 kingdoms? What did he tell Jeroboam? Yeah. Yeah. He offered Jeroboam the same thing he gave to David. But Jeroboam didn't do it. He offered the same thing to Jehu. He said, by the way, Jehu, I'm going to, because you will carry out my pronouncements against Ahab and his descendants, I will have your sons sit on the throne for 4 generations. And they did. Except Zechariah was 6 months long. Because they didn't follow either. No.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, it doesn't matter how many Yehus you get up there.
I left that softball up there hanging.
So I had to take it. But it goes back to what Daryl was saying in the book of Daniel, is that God is in control. And God is in control when he lets the chaos happen. That's a weird thought, right? When God chooses to let chaos happen, he's still in control of that. And when God chooses order, he's in control of that. So I think, for me, I look at that and I go, it's important for me to know that no matter what's going on in this chaotic, stupid world around me, God is ultimately in charge. And I don't have to be.
Mm-hmm.
You get to redefine what chaos is, because chaos is perspective.
Correct.
Because I see chaos versus order, but that's not how God saw it, and so you get to remove yourself from that and be like, oh, whatever's happening, goodness, I almost said happens for a reason, but I don't actually that's
God's going to bring all of this back together at the end. And so just as crazy as this all is and dysfunctional as it is, he's still going to bring it all back together.
No, Darren?
It's interesting that two groups of people that at the time of Solomon were if you look at it externally, that's one culture. But there are huge differences here between how the people think the lineage should be in Judah and the way things work in Israel. You know, Israel is kind of the more, who's the most effective and who can pull the most elites together to hold the kingdom. And, you know, maybe we thought we had enough and we didn't, and that's why we last a week. And, you know, in Judah, the people don't put up with that. Their decision is, this is our kingdom, our kingly line, and that's who they stuck with. And I wonder how much of that was because, you know, they didn't have to look super far to find the temple.
Well, yeah, and because you have 10 different tribes, whereas you have one, well, really two, Judah and Benjamin, but they were, yeah, they came out of that same culture, and yet there was a bunch of different tribes and one tribe, and they were very clannish and tribal.
There's hardly anything more important than who's in charge, especially when you're talking about who's the king.
Yeah.
You know, we don't have to worry about who the king is because we can wait 4 years for this whoever person in charge is that we don't like to get replaced, and 2 years to flip the Congress. But when there's one person that has complete control of life, death, property, inheritance, they can dissolve your marriage, they can do whatever they want. That's really important. And the way that we pick that person is either very well defined for Judah or all over the map for Israel. And that's just weird that they would come out of this shared experience and end up with that.
It's like, it would be like electing a president for life, and then who can wield that power? So it's a very different culture. It also doesn't help when you look at this and when you're reading through this to realize that the same names appear in both sides, and that the same person will have a couple of different names. And so I found myself reading this going, okay, this Jehoram, is this the Jehoram of Israel or the Jehoram of Judah? Have to go back and look at that and remember that. Or which one is it? Ahaziah. You notice that both King Ahab and King Jehoshaphat had sons that they named Jehoram, who reigned at the same time in two different kingdoms. You know, I mean, it's hard enough for us to keep track of which President George Bush we're talking about. Imagine if they co-reigned at the same time, one in Canada and one in the United States.
Like you said, you have to go back, and it's like, wait a minute, I thought this was a prophet for something else, and it's like, oh yeah, it's the same guy. So, very confusing.
Now you can go out and look and get and download a chart like this. There's several of them out there. But if you want to really get to know this, I'd recommend that you write your own chart. You learn things when you do it yourself, and I've done that, but it was in pencil, and I didn't want to try and put it up there for you. But it really does do quite a bit for you. I also noticed we talked a whole lot about the prophets in through the last couple of weeks. There's Elijah and Elisha for last week. We were introduced to Jonah and Micah and Amos, and we're introduced to Isaiah. There's Shemaiah, there's Iddo the seer, there's Yehu the prophet, as opposed to Yehu the king. So let me open this up. As you read about the prophets, what stood out to you? What do you want to cover? What questions do you have? What did you notice?
Growing up, I always thought that the prophets were like in timeline order,
Mhm.
Like, they were like one boom boom after another. But as I was studying and reading, I discovered, oh, they actually overlap and they're for different regions. And, but there said there was 14, but one of them is kind of debatable if he was a prophet because he was self-proclaimed a prophet. I forgot which one that is. But I just thought it was interesting going back and reading it and just going, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Having another-
The order that we have them in our canon is not chronological. Yeah. And so they appear at different times. And even though they were based north and south, sometimes they overlapped. You know, the story that we have in our reading where there was a prophet in Judah that the Lord sent to prophesy in Israel, said, go up there, prophesy this, and then leave, but don't eat, don't drink, don't do anything in there, just go prophesy and get out. Which he didn't, but, you know, there's that story too. A prophet that says, yes, I'm a prophet, but he lied.
Reading through this, I finally figured out the difference between Rehoboam and Jeroboam. Those always confuse me. And I think I've got them straight now, so.
I think you finally straightened out Rehoboam and Jeroboam.
I remember
Uh-huh.
growing up thinking, okay, which one was the worst? I forget, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was Rehoboam was the,
Yeah.
depending on the day, I guess. Finally got those two straight.
Yeah. Okay. Do you ever have trouble remembering which story is about Elijah and which one's Elisha and which one came first? J comes before H. Okay. Yeah. And J comes before H. I was going to say, that didn't help me. Yes. Elisha was bold. One of your heroes, as I understand, yes. Yeah.
You brought up the prophet who is told to leave and come back without eating, and he does, and then he's killed. I mean, I've read that many times in the past, and I reread it, you know, and it's like, why? I mean, why is it recorded? I mean,
What answer did you come up with?
well, I did it.
That's why we put this question out to you. What is important to God? What's the answers here? What do you think? We're talking about the story where the prophet in Judah is told to go up and prophesy against the worship center under Jeroboam, and told, don't eat, don't drink while you're in Israel, and then come back to Judah without eating or drinking. But there is a prophet in Israel who hears about this guy and says, oh, you know, I really want to hear, you know, he's one of the prophets still in Israel, and here's a fellow prophet of the Lord, of Yahweh. And so he chases him down and says, no, I can't. He's stopped under a tree, so apparently he's already tired and famished and thirsty and thinking, I still got a long ways to go. This other prophet says, well, no, the Lord told me that you could come and eat at my place. Oh, that sounds so good. Okay. And he does, and he dies. He's killed on the way. If I remember correctly, a lion kills him, knocks him off his donkey, and the lion doesn't eat him. It stands there beside him, and the donkey stays beside him. It's not scared of the lion. And they're guarding the body until he comes and gets the body and buries him.
That part I understand, that it's to demonstrate that God has killed the prophet because the lion doesn't kill the donkey. I mean, it's purposeful.
Mhm.
That's why it happened. But it's like the ownership of listening to God and not letting your opinion be changed about what you're doing shouldn't be altered by somebody who just claims to have a message from God. I mean, he claims to be the same, but he receive it from, that he was holding to, but gave it up when he heard another person contradict it.
Yeah. If you have a message from God, why would you listen to somebody that gives a different message? Mm-hmm.
Even though they preached, he wasn't, preach
A different gospel.
gospel.
Yeah. Let them be accursed because it's not a gospel. If you receive something other than what you have received. Is that your lesson? Okay, good. We can go home.
That always seems to me that that would just be an incredibly confusing time to live, because we can read the prophets in our Bible and we know who was from God and who wasn't, but they had a lot of false prophets. And even if you apply the idea, well, wait and see if what the prophet says comes true, then you know they're real. Some of the things that they talked about didn't come true for a long time. So there wasn't immediate fruition of what they were saying. And then you have these kings going back and forth, and sometimes I feel like I have a little bit of sympathy for just your regular average people who are just trying to plod along and figure it out. Who in the world do you listen to? How do you know what's right and what's not? And it must have been clear enough that there were people that followed God regardless, but it must have been very confusing, I think.
Yeah. If you can't hear, she's saying it had to be very confusing because you had prophets that were speaking on both sides of an issue. And some were false prophets and some were real. And if the way you tell whether a prophet is from the Lord or not is what he says happens or not. But some of the things that they say are going to happen don't happen for years. What do you do in the meantime? How do you figure out which one's right, which one's not? I mean, it's easy for us to look into the past and, was this way, hindsight's always 20/20. You know, I can see real clearly in the past, even in my own life, well, that was a good decision, or that was a bad decision. But at the time, I did not purposely make a bad decision. How do you know? How do you tell? And Becky's just saying that she's got more sympathy in reading through this and thinking about it for them living in the time period. But studying, what do I do now? How do I learn that now? Right? You know? And do we have the same thing going on today?
I mean, basically, we have similar messages, but there's lots of different belief systems. So how do you know?
How do you know?
You have to
How did they know? Well, for one thing, they did have some written documents, and you'll go back to the covenants, back to the commandments, back to the Pentateuch, read what God has given you, and is this in alignment with that or not? And how many times have you read this already, and you're going to read it some more, where the people get serious? There is a leader who says, we need to get serious about following Yahweh and doing what he says. And in the process of that, they find the book of the covenant and go, oh, that's how we're supposed to do it. We kind of drifted away over time. Did you notice let me come back to you. Let me pose another question and we'll come right back to you so you can be thinking about it. Did you catch the migration of the people that happened from north to south? Debbie, your point.
Well, no, I was just wondering, do they have priests during this time that could help with steering the people back towards God? I mean, it wasn't just the king, they would have priests too, right? That would be among them, I presume, and every city would have priests, or not?
I should have let you go first. Exactly. The Levites were scattered throughout the nation, right? Through all 12 tribes, right? And their job was to teach the law of the Lord. Okay. What happened when Jeroboam the first became king? Let me throw this back up there. Oh, am I going the right way? I'm not going the right way. I want to throw that back up there. He set up in the north at two different locations at Bethel and Dan. North, yeah. Well, Jeroboam began to appoint non-Levites. In fact, if you would basically pay him a fee, he would appoint you as a priest. Now, understand, the priest lived off of what was brought to be sacrificed. So it was an easier job than farming your own stuff. Okay? So he would appoint anybody as priest. And a lot of the Levites left Israel and went down to Jerusalem during the time of Jeroboam the first. So those people those Levites who were being faithful and who were teaching the law are now migrating because they need income, and they abandoned their lands in the north and they're going down to the temple to do things the right way. So who's left up north? Not the people whose culture is studying the law of the Lord. At least not all of them, not a lot of them.
Is that why the guy who found the Levite that was traveling and paid him to be his personal priest did so much and made a position in his house for the guy?
That was earlier in the time of the judges, but yes, it was. In fact, that Levite that he did was actually a son of Moses, if I remember right. Grandson of Moses, a descendant of Moses. But that was like, not only do I have a Levite, I have a Levite descendant of Moses as my priest. John?
I think this also tells us why it's so important that we help out and honor our teachers here at Oakdale who are teaching our kids and our youth group, because we're always one generation away from not being the church. And I mean, it's a big deal that we are teaching our kids and mentoring our young people and helping them find the way, because you see how much the church can change in just a couple of generations if we don't really stay in the Word ourselves and pass on the right things in the right way to them.
There's also in this, in between the two kingdoms, there was on and off again war, because they were two different kingdoms and battle skirmishes and stuff, but then there were also times of peace, and there's also a lot of interaction and intermarrying going on between north and south. As for example, if we look at this, we see on the chart up there, Ahab's wife is Jezebel. Do you remember where Jezebel is from? Phoenicia. Okay? And she brought the worship of Baal or Baal with her. And it's a big deal. Up until that time, it was more a case of, the golden calves that Jeroboam set up were, here's your God Yahweh. And then Ahab came in and it was, Baal is God, not Jehovah. But Ahab and Jezebel's daughter, Athaliah, gets married to Jehoram, or Joram, whichever name you want to use, because they're both spellings there, of Judah. Now, when Ahaziah gets killed, he has no son yet, and so Athaliah usurps the throne. She kills the royal family. You remember that story? And would have killed all of the descendants of the David's line, except that one woman took a baby and slipped it out and hid the baby in the temple for 6 years with her dad, who was the high priest. And at 6 years, that's when you read the story about him getting all the Levites, captain of the guards, basically the army of Levites who protected the temple and were soldiers, and said, okay, we're going to proclaim him king now and throw her out and kill her. And there's that story of Joash. And he was faithful to Yahweh, faithful to the Lord, as long as Jehoiada, the high priest who raised him, was alive. But when Jehoiada died, Joash took a left turn and stopped following the Lord with all his heart. Do you see the importance of influence here? And family and culture and who you hang around with? And, well, who you marry and what your kids hang around with?
The safest place to hide is in the temple. No one's there.
None of the non-God worshipers are going there, at least at that time. But in this, do you also see, how many times did you read in this passage that, well, especially in the northern kings, that, well, this king did pretty good, except that he still followed in the sins of Jeroboam? Or this king in Judah did well, but he didn't take out all the high places. He didn't quite go all the way in what the law was. He let the culture stand some. And yet God worked through them.
I would love to know the smirk on God's face through this entire period of time, thinking this is exactly what you asked for when you asked for a king. Like I told you, like I was your king, and then you were like, but we need a king, and you were like, I mean, like this is going to be a problem, and you were like, we need a king, and he was like, all right. So
Yeah.
this chart is
This whole mess of kings and all that was exactly what God told them was going to happen. And they said, yeah, but that's what we want.
right.
Well, no, that wasn't exactly what they wanted, but that was what that entails. Yeah.
This is very typical. Like this isn't super like out of the ordinary for other kingdoms in the area. So like
Right.
this mirrors other kingdoms of the time, and that's what you get.
Yeah.
If you don't have God as king, you get the same things everybody else.
Especially the stuff going on in Israel, northern tribe, is exactly what was going on in all the kingdoms around them. A lot of assassinations, who's got power, who takes over. But one of the things I remember is Jehu, king of Israel, was a descendant of Jehoshaphat. Okay? Jehoshaphat sought the Lord with all his heart. He was one of the good kings who did seek the Lord. His grandson, or depends on we know he's a descendant of Jehoshaphat. It says that. We're just not sure how many, because when we read son, we think direct. When they use son, it means descendant of. So there's also Nimshi in there, which we have no idea, that doesn't appear we don't know where that connection is. But he's a descendant. But he is a commander in the army of Israel, yet his ancestor is king of Judah, was king of Judah. You know, and Jehu is also a follower of Yahweh. You know, now he becomes king and takes a left turn, but you know, so you've got all this intermarrying and stuff going on. Dale and then Darren.
Could I ask where the Assyrian captivity of Israel occurred in this lineage?
After Hosea, down at the bottom, there. Understand it didn't happen all at once. And in part of our reading, you find that towards the bottom part of this chart, that Judah is attacking, Israel is attacking Judah, and Judah feels beat upon, and so he took all the treasures of the king's house and temple and sent to the Assyrian king and said, hey, come help me fight these guys, Syria and Israel. And he says, okay, talk me into it. So that's where he came in and he killed, captured Damascus, killed Ben-Hadad, who was the king of Syria at that time. And then, which one was it? Ahaz? The Ahaz on Judah's side that went up and saw the altar that was in Damascus and sent the designs back and said, hey, replace the bronze altar that God had made, that Moses made, and put this in its place. So they came in, he captured the Syrians, carried them off, and some of the area of Galilee and Gilead, the northern, northeast part of Israel, and carried those people off into Assyria. But it's until after Hosea that he comes in, should be in this next week's readings, where he comes in and takes all of Israel. So all of these conquerings, understand it doesn't happen all at one time. It does happen in stages, both in the north and in the south. Darryl?
I was just gonna say, but the culture, generational, kind of what John was talking about. Who names their kid Jeroboam the second? Especially after they're talking about the sins of Jeroboam the first. You know, I don't know any Hitler Juniors. You know,
So you gotta get really used to that culture that
it's normal. It's like this is the way it is to honor a king who is so evil by naming another kid king after him. You know, Jeroboam 1 was enough, but they are, you know, we repeat history.
But did he consider him evil? Did they consider him evil?
That's what I'm saying. They thought, he's a pretty good dude, but
Yeah.
when we look at it, it's just repeating itself.
I know it's going to come up in our reading. Manasseh was in Judah is titled as an evil king, but he reigned a really long time. And when you look at historically, the kingdom under him was very prosperous. Life was good, except he wasn't seeking the Lord. So understand that what we have in 2 Kings and in the Kings and the Chronicles, where it says king is good or bad, is relating to how is their relationship with Yahweh, not how well they ruled or how well the kingdom was prosperous or not prosperous. So, different set of balances. We got about 3 or 4 minutes left. In reading about Elisha, the prophet, and all the great things and miracles and stuff that he did, you know, there are a lot of the stuff, the healings that he did, you know, making an axe head float, all those stories that you remember. What was Elisha's message? It records all those things that he did, miraculous things, curing death in a pot, curing the water. Yet we don't have any recordings of, for the most part, of what his message was. We have a few where he sent in a lot of cases, he sent a messenger. But it's also interesting, I didn't realize the story of the Shumanite woman. There's some really interesting little tidbits scattered out in there. She's the woman who Elisha was coming by, and so she realized that he was a man of God and said, hey, you're coming, let me fix a meal for you. And okay. And then it's like, well, it's kind of the end of the day, stay here. It tells her husband, we need to build a room for him and his servant. Put it up on top of the roof so he can come and go as he wants to. Okay. They do that. And basically benefits Elisha so much, and he's going, what do you want? Do you want me to speak to a commander, to an army commander, to the chief of police, you want me to speak to the king for you? She goes, I don't want anything. Surely you want something. No. And his servant says, she doesn't have a son. Okay. He talks to God. He says, okay, you're going to have a son. She goes, don't kid me about that. I mean, sure, she wanted a son all her life, but is not able to have one. But she has a son. And you know the story that, when he is old enough to be out in the field a little bit with his dad, starts having a headache, comes home, and he dies. She says, get the saddle ready, and she goes. Interesting part there where Elisha sees her coming, and he makes the statement of, go see, and the servant says, is everything all right? And, is your husband all right? Is the boy all right? Are you all right? All is well. And she comes and she falls at Elisha's feet, and guys says, let go, get back, and he's going, no. She's in great distress, and Yahweh has not told me why. Which my brain works is like, you usually knew why people were coming before they got there? Apparently. And so he's confused. It's like, I don't know why. But she's in great distress. Her heart is broken. Her son has died. But her words to Elisha is, all is well. I wish I had that kind of faith. I hope I have that kind of faith. That says, everything around me has gone to chaos. My heart is broken, but all is well. All is well. In the midst of all this chaos, all is well. Interesting follow-up. Gehazi is relating this, of course the son is resurrected. Gehazi, the servant, is relating this story to the king one time, and the woman and her son show up at court. And he's like, oh, yeah, that boy I was telling you raised from the dead, that's him. The king says, tell me this story. So, interesting reading. Next week, be taking a look at more in Isaiah, 2 Kings, 2 Chronicles. Read about the prophet Isaiah. Remember, as you're doing that, looking through that, what is important to God? What's the message that God is giving to us? Again, the reading list is out in the foyer, and John, you and Daryl have it next week, right? All right. Great. Thanks for being here. Go rescue some teachers.